So hi everyone. I was lucky enough just now to be teaching a group of adults at my community, Congregation Nativot Shalom, all about the book of Psalms, and so much came up that I thought to share it more widely. Maybe I should have recorded the class as it was happening, but here's our chance to look very closely at the book of the Tanakh, the book of the Hebrew Bible that ends up being featured most prominently in the world of Jewish prayer. You cannot go a chapter of Psalms without coming across something familiar if you've ever prayed in a Jewish context. Even in the English, even in the Hebrew, even in Jewish and not Jewish settings, Psalms end up pervading our world with meaning. So what I want to point out, number one, is that in the Tanakh, in the Hebrew Bible itself, there are three sections. The first one is the 5 books. After that are the prophets. And after that come the section of writings, wisdom literature. And one of the things that you can see as you move from the first third of the Torah into the second third, the prophets, and then the final third, the wisdom writing, is that God seems to shift in prominence. In the 5 books, God is everything and everywhere, and then the world is created, and little by little, people end up becoming agents of their own destiny, agents of activity in the world, consequences of which are then they travel through human deeds into the cosmos and then back, and God is an active player. When it comes to the world of the prophets, we bring about our own salvation or our own doom, and the language telling us how important our actions are come through the prophets. But it's not that God sends the consequence out of nowhere, out of God's desire. It's that our deeds end up influencing the world, and God is simply the conduit, as if that's simple. Then comes the world of Psalms. The world of Psalms opens up this new genre of literature called Ketuvim, the writings, and it includes Proverbs and Ecclesiastes and the scrolls of Ruth and Esther, and then eventually even Job. The things that end up becoming included in the Tanakh and the Hebrew Bible are fascinating. I wonder what holds them all together. They seem not to be the same book, except that we hold them as one canon. And that's partially because we hold multiple truths at the same time. And what a gift it is to see at our sacred core a multivocal tradition. Things that are not simple, things that are not one. Not even God is simple or one or perfect or describable. But in Psalms, which is 150 separate chapters, we have the gift of tradition telling us King David wrote this. In truth, we don't know where all of the texts came from. Each one is its own chapter, and they have their own moods, their own vibrations, as it were. So just taking the moment to look at a few different chapters of Psalms, and at your leisure, maybe you can watch this or do your own study, but looking at chapter 1 of Psalms, you might find it familiar. In fact, Rabbi David Paskin, a dear friend of mine, and I wrote a melody to Ashrei Ha'ish, the very first words of Psalms. And the translation that I have in front of me is from JPS. It's not perfect. Nothing ever could be. Even the Hebrew is itself a translation of a direct encounter with God. So maybe the best thing we could do is either not say anything, because how can I describe anything truly about infinity, eternity? On the other hand, my heart has its experiences. So did King David's. So does yours. So when we pour it out authentically, it is rarely simple. And when someone hears us later in time, our best, recorded either through Facebook Live or through written words, nigunim, the songs of our hearts end up being much more complicated than anyone would be able to describe. Maybe even more complicated than we can describe to ourselves. Here is the beginning of Psalms. Ashrei ha'ish asher lo halach ba'atzat rasha'im, u'v'derech hata'im lo amad, u'v'moshav leitzim lo yashav. And here's one translation. This is the JPS translation, taken a little bit away from it because I don't want to use gender, talking about people. Happy is the one who has not followed the counsel of wicked, and literally, lo halach, walked after the wicked, taken the path of the sinners. But here it's actually didn't stand, lo amad, didn't stand in the path of sinners, uv'moshav leitzim, and in the company of leitzim, and that can be lazy people, this says insolent, it can be leitzanim, it can be those who are clownish, didn't sit. What I take from this is, first of all, Tehillim, Psalms, all of praise, each one of them is a joyous outpouring of music, the music of your soul. It begins with the word Ashrei, happy. Happy, how do I get happy? King David probably wondered that too, maybe even looking back to the complicated spiritual ancestor that he was evoking, the king before him. Saul began happy, a purposeful servant of God, through whose lived experience God's authority became more complicated. He went into his own pit of sadness. Saul did, and David witnessed it. And David's ascent to the throne was complicated by Saul's downfall. Maybe David, an attuned soul, was aware of the frailty of the human soul. And as we look at David's life, it is clear that he is no simple human being either. You don't have to go to the controversies around Bathsheba and David's own humanity and his very, very inappropriate actions at times. You could look at the dedication of the temple, and you see that when the ark was being brought into Jerusalem, and David himself didn't build the temple, but he inaugurated Jerusalem, the place where the temple would be, he was enraptured, and he was mecharker. He was either flashing the crowd, some people believe is the translation. He lost all sense of boundary out of ecstasy with God. And Michal bat Shaul, right, his wife Michal, who was the daughter of the king before him, of Saul, saw him and despised, thought less of David, and confronted David and said, how can you lose yourself such a way? How can you conduct yourself with such indignity? How could a holy person be so boundaryless? And David's answer is both complicated and incredibly illuminating. Would that we would have that kind of fire in our souls. Boundaried, certainly, but fire. He says to his wife, Michal, unkaloti od mizot vehayiti shafal be'inai. If I could only lose myself even more, I would debase myself in my own eyes. My joy, my experience of God that is beyond language. Would that I felt that all the time. What a gift that would be. So, if we would associate that kind of lostness, that enrapture, that feeling of ecstasy that King David must have felt in that moment, that of course made him look like less, made him questionable in the eyes of others, let's take into account who the ostensible author of Psalms is, and then we read the beginning of Psalms again. Happy is the one who has not followed the wicked, who doesn't stand with sinners, and who doesn't sit with those who are clownish, meaning there is a sacred way to experience the ecstasy and the boundarylessness of the world because God is beyond the definitions and boundaries of this world. If you have a direct encounter with God that we assume King David did, the Talmud describes King David as being awoken by a magic harp at midnight because he didn't want to miss a moment of singing with God. Well, he wants to point out to us, and if we disassociate it from him, fine. Psalms wants to instruct us how to find joy. What a gift. What a gift it is to have the wisdom of this strange, beautiful book of the Tanakh telling us how to find joy. How do you find joy? Do not stand, do not walk, do not sit in wrongness, but don't stay still. There is a way to walk, there is a way to stand, there is a way to sit, and it involves joy. It involves song. And how do I do that? Hi'im b'torat Adonai cheftzo, because with the Torah of God is my joy, is my delight. Uve'torato yegeh yomam v'layla, and with Torah will I delight day and night. I will delve into it day and night. I will not be tired even if time moves on. What a power it is to see the beginning of Psalms telling me no matter what your posture, walking, sitting, standing, no matter what time it is, day or night, there's a way of feeling sacred joy. So if you wake up in the middle of the night, if you find yourself in any corner of the world, joy is close. What a gift that is. That is where Psalms begin. And God, through Torah, is present with us. And when we have the direct encounter with God, which might not involve the words of Torah, but the encounter with God itself is Torah, that can be my joy. If only I walk, if only I sit, if only I run. As Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, and we have this archived in the annals of American mystical history. Dr. King taught us, and this week we celebrate his life, fly. And if you can't fly, run. And if you can't run, walk. And as my teacher, an entering rabbinical student at HUC, Matan Kach, has taught us as well, if you can't walk, roll. And Dr. King closes with, forward, always forward. We are always in motion, even if we are sitting. Our souls are always in action. And so the beginning of Psalms tells us that that is a path towards joy. But if King David is telling us through chapter 1 how to find joy, he must be aware, and we certainly are as well, that joy is not the only emotional state that we find ourselves in. So what I'd like to do is share with you one of my favorite psalms, which is not entirely joyful. King David begins, Mizmor Shir Chanukah Bait LeDavid. It's Psalm 30. And this is one, I'll just read the English in the JPS, and you please follow along either in your own text or open your heart, or both, or both. What is the mood of this? What is the place of this? What is the power of this? It is so human, this chapter of Psalms. We recite it every morning, actually. I praise you, Adonai, you have lifted me up, and not let my enemies rejoice over me. What does it mean? You have lifted me up. God, you have lifted me up. Where was I before? I was not so high before, was I? God, you lifted me up. Oh, Adonai, my God, I cried out to you and you healed me, which means where was I when I called out to you? I was in sadness. I was in dissent. I was in illness. I was in dis-ease. Something was not working within me. I felt sadness. And God, you healed me. You brought me up from Sheol. And for those who think that Judaism doesn't have a notion of the netherworld, of Hades, of hell, we call it Sheol. I was in that dark, down place, and you preserved me from going down into the pit. Chitani miar divor. You saved me from that terrible descent. And then, Zamru ladonai chasidav. Sing to God. You chasidim, you people who feel chesed more than anything else, you lovers of the universe, and praise God's name. God is angry for an instant, but when God is happy, there is life, which means, God, you know what it is to be angry, because it happens once in a while, even for you. So when I am out of touch with my own joy, you understand what that is. I can call to you. You can relate to me, God. You know what anger is like, and I know what you're like, because I know what life feels like. You lie down weeping. This is a gorgeous verse. Ba'erev yalin bechi v'laboker rina. At night, I lie down crying sometimes. That is sometimes where I am, says the psalmist. But at dawn, there is rina. There is a kind of joy that just pours out of you. It's a joy that makes you dance or stand or sit or cry or sing. When I was untroubled, when I felt shalva, when I was at a moment of calm and serenity, I said to myself, nothing will ever bother me, nothing will shake me. Verse 8, and you, Adonai, when you were happy, you made me as firm as a mountain, meaning everything was fine. Nothing was ever going to touch me. But when you hid your face, I felt terrified. Now, it's not that God necessarily actively hides God's face, but that becomes a phrase in Jewish teaching, Hester Panim. When do we imagine that God's face is hidden? When suffering is happening in this world. It can't be that God sees me and lets me suffer. God must be looking elsewhere. And we can think charitably and with love, maybe God is tending to someone else's broken heart right now. Mine will have its turn. And so what happened when my heart was broken and I imagined God's face was hidden? Verse 9, I called to you, Adonai. I made appeal to God and I said, this is such holy chutzpah. This is the holy chutzpah. You might know that phrase. Holy chutzpah was a phrase that Rabbi Shlomo Carlebach taught the world. It's something that he channeled straight out of the prophets, straight out of Jewish tradition's roots. What is to be gained from my death? Ma bitza bidami b'dati al shachat. What good will you have of me, God, if I am in Sheol, if I am in the pit? I can't sing to you if I'm dead. So God, you need me. You need me to sing to you. I'm going to sing to you. Let me live. Hayodcha afar hayagid amitecha. Can dust know you? Can dust teach your truths? No. So I say to you, God, in a moment of deep vulnerability, Shma Adonai v'choneni. Adonai heye ozer li. God, hear me and give me grace. Grace me. Be my help. Be a helper to me, God. And what did you, God, do? So the psalmist who's been upset and depressed on the verge of the pit of despair. It's a Princess Bride reference if you didn't pick it up. God, you turned my sadness into dancing. You undid my clothing of mourning, and you girded me with joy. I'm dressed in my happiness. That my whole being would sing to you nonstop. Oh God, I will praise you forever. And for those who think that Psalms and the Siddur and traditional Jewish prayer are nonstop praise of God, please know this. Why do you think the psalmist turns with praise, turns with song, acknowledges despair? It's because it is so human. Psalms is a book of sacred humanism. The singer knows what it is to feel all of these feelings and has had a direct encounter with God, though you and I might not be able to understand what that means. They're trying to explain it. They're trying to convey it. And if you would only open your heart. And we're about to look at a phrase that says exactly that. You would hear God's voice ever more clear. And you and I, maybe, would get together to a place at the beginning of Psalms where it would be Ashrei Ha'ish. We would find more joy. And in a world where joy is sought, which is every moment, every world, every age, every person, every life, joy is your birthright. Joy is the divine within you, waiting to be acknowledged, waiting to be accessed. Joy is not far away in the heavens. It is close at hand. Psalm 95 is one that we might know well because in Kabbalat Shabbat, Friday nights, we have this incredible divine experience. It might be the latest addition to what has become traditional Jewish prayer, but Kabbalat Shabbat, which was initiated by the mystics in Tzfat in the late 1500s, mid 1500s, was an attempt to approach Shabbat as an embodied bride. Love. Shabbat as love, God as love. It's ancient language. Psalm 95 begins the sequence of 7 psalms, 7 days of creation, culminating with Shabbat, which means the culminating moment of this week is the culminating experience with God, and Psalm 95 begins it all. Lechu niranana ladonai. Let us feel that rina. Let us go be joyful with God. And the mystics would walk on the hills and mountains of Tzfat wearing white, crying out to God, and singing and joyfully connecting to the divine with words. In the ancient world, during the time of the temple, we would bring physical sacrifices to God. We don't bring that anymore. We bring our words, but we can feel our own hearts, our own souls, our very larynx vibrate when we sing out loud. What a gift it is to feel the power of prayer in our bodies. So when I say, when you say, when King David says, when Psalm reads, Lechu niranana ladonai, let us go rejoice with God, not with God to God. I can make it. I can access that joyful experience of the divine. Naria litzur yeshenu, sing out to the rock of our salvation, which means I have had a rough week. Have you? That's true every week, isn't it? Some weeks more than others, but it is always true that this week has had stuff. Well, if you can let that stuff go and say, God, you are my steady rock, you are my tzur. We call God Tzur Yisrael. The Israeli Declaration of Independence labels God, not saying Adonai, not saying Elohim, God as a compromise with the secularists and the religious Zionists, and Jewish tradition itself calls God Tzur Yisrael, the rock of Israel. So we come into God's presence with prayer. Now remember, we started with chapter 1. We went to chapter 30. Now we're on chapter 95. These are moods. These are human moods. I am ready to rejoice with God. Let it all go. Let the week go. I'm going to walk to you wearing white. I'm going to cultivate the joy in my soul. Remember when King David dedicated Jerusalem, he just lost himself in the ecstasy of God. Psalms is not about one mood. Psalms is about all moods. The despair that leads me to reach out to God from the pit. The joy that leads me to feel God's presence with all of me. I unlock my own walls and allow my heart to soar with God. And if someone watching me thinks it's odd that I just start dancing, fine. May they start dancing with me. I live in Berkeley, California, and sometimes I see people dancing in the streets. How about instead of laughing and wondering about them, how about I just let my guard down and feel my own soul delight, even if I'm not going to join them in the middle of the street. They can be my teacher too, because the emotions there are real, royal, holy, sacred emotions coming from the core of us, which is God. The power of chapter 95 is not only that we are calling out to God and saying, let's go sing and dance with God. Come, let us bow down and kneel, which means I'm not all that. I feel like I accomplished so much this week. And some weeks I really feel like I have. But no matter what I've accomplished, I'm not all that. I just need Shabbos like everybody else. I need God. I need God. Psalm 95 tells me I need God and I can have God. I would just close my eyes and open my eyes and see the majesty of the world. Pause at a flower. Pause at a human being with eyes. Stop looking at the mirror and look through a window at the world. And the end of it is so powerful because it is a very humble way of describing Jewish history. The beginning of Psalm 95 is, let's go celebrate with God, but then it gets really human really fast. So listen to this. This is chapter 95, verse 6. Bo nishtachaveh v'nichra'ah. Right? Come, let us bow down and kneel. Bend the knee before Adonai, our Maker. God is our God, and we are the people God tends, the flock in God's care. And if the sentence were to end there, it would just sound glorious. It's like on the high holidays, Ki anu amecha. We are your nation. You are our lover. You fashion us. You love us. You hold us. But it doesn't end there. We are the people God tends, the flock in God's care. If im bekolo tishmau, if you would just listen to God. Which is a way of saying, you're so wrapped up in your joy, you know you could have it all. Just listen. Of course, it's a parent speaking. Just listen. You can have your dessert if you eat your asparagus, whatever it is in a more serious way. You can have it all. Just come close to me. Elsewhere in Psalms, in Ashrei, the most famous of all Psalms, it says, Karov Adonai l'chol korav, l'chol asher yikra'uhu ve'emet. God is near to all who call upon God in truth, which means just call. Let your voice speak. Let your ears hear your truth. God is so close, not far away. It's not the God of verticality, God up and down. This is a teaching of Rabbi Art Green. It's the God of internality. God's right here. It's not me. It's deeper than me. It's the thing that connects me with every other sentient and non-sentient living thing in this world. God is within. And all of these moods of Psalms tell me I could access it im bekolo tishma'u, if I would only open up myself to hearing God's still small voice. So listen to the story here. And this is where we'll end for now in a few minutes. Verse 8. Al takshu levavchem kameriva. We say this Friday night. Don't be stubborn like you were at Merivah on the days of Massah in the wilderness. This is from the Chumash, from the story of the Exodus and the traveling through the desert. We did not give God an easy time. We didn't give each other peace. We did not give God an easy time. When your ancestors put me to the test, they tried me, though they had witnessed my deeds, meaning we don't even listen when it's clear to us that God is on our side. Plagues are happening, and we just made it through the Red Sea, and we complain that there isn't meat. I'm alive. I should have just been happy with that. But we're rarely satisfied. We are rarely smechim b'chelkenu. What a gift it would be to find how to be ashrei, to be happy, like we began the book of Psalms with. So we end the song. You might know this. This is the melody of Rabbi Shlomo Kalibach, the way he ended each chapter of Psalms, right? The melody is Arba'im Shana Akut Bidor. So our translation, 40 years did I wrestle with that generation in the desert. I said to myself, says God, they are a senseless people. They will never do the right thing. They will never know my ways. And regarding them, I swore in anger, they will never come to my resting place. It's a horrible thing. It's a reflection actually of how rebellious we were the entire time in the desert. And you might hear it in the sweet melody, right? Asher nishbati be'api, im yevon el menuchati. Now that's so pretty sounding, but it's not pretty language. It's honesty. It's honesty. And so what I want to say to you, and what I want to hear myself say, because it's so important, Psalms is not a book detached from reality, and it is not a book of a disembodied God. It is not an arcane primal book of a God that no longer speaks in our world. Psalms is language of the human soul. It is an honest song. It is a song that is more complicated than any cartoon of any human being you could ever imagine. The righteous author of Psalms, according to tradition, is King David, and you and I can name how King David was not always righteous, and yet we sing his songs. We sing his truths, because there's a way that even from that complicated soul, you can find enormous, unlimited light. The potential of a human being, when faced with honesty, who can still sing, who can bring forward godly, sacred love. There is no limit to what that means in this world. And in these few chapters that we've looked at of Psalms and the rest of it, and the rest of Jewish tradition and the rest of human experience, you can see that redemption is not going to be found when we hold up someone to a model of ethical purity who has never done wrong. No, our models, our heroes are all faulted. You look at the modern universe of Marvel movies that are coming out, and every reimagining of origin stories of all of those heroes, not the darkest like Batman from DC, but from the rest of the human universe, they are all faulted. Even the gods who become heroes in the world of Marvel, they are all angry, despondent, depressed, violent. They find ways to counter their own stuff, sometimes imperfectly, and sometimes they die in the midst of the struggle. But what a gift it is to look at Psalms and say, this is our hero, this is heroism. To recognize it's not all about you. Ashrei ha'ish. How does a person find happiness? You find happiness because you can sit, you can walk, you can stand, you can roll, you can fly. As long as you do it with honesty. Lechol asher yikra'uhu ve'emet. Call out to God from your own truth and sing. The case that we make, that King David and that Psalms makes in chapter 30, there's no singing when I'm dead. I can't sing to you when I'm dead, so I'm going to live. I'm going to live fiercely. I will live with my complicated truths, doing my best, refining my character at every moment I can, never pretending that I'm not human. Hoping that when I die, my story will be told, this was a human being who did his best, who sang, who taught, who shared, who loved. That's as good as it's going to get. In a religious way, I say, God, that's what I can offer you. That's the sacrifice I offer you. It's not a sacrifice that reduces me. It doesn't take away from me. It gives me the chance to give of you to the world, gently and with love. Will I do it perfectly? Definitely not. Did David do it perfectly? Definitely not. Do any of us do it perfectly? No way. So if I have to wait for a perfect person before I can learn their Torah, there's no Torah to learn. The gift that we have in the book of Psalms and that we can give to each other and that this world is in deep, deep need of is the ability to learn deep Torah from complicated truths, to know that it's never going to be perfect, it's never going to be pure, it's just going to be real. So may you be blessed. May I be blessed. May we all be blessed to learn together, to sing together, to stand and walk and crawl and roll together until the day when we can hear each other perfectly, forgive each other completely, come face to face and sing that song that the whole world is waiting for.